Good evening. My name is Bill Siegel. Tonight I'm going to be giving a speech at the November 30th meeting of the San Antonio Mexican Coin Club. My speech is going to be on Mexican Republic 25 centavos. I am going to assume that you are already familiar with 25 centavos because this is a relatively detail-oriented speech, and those of you who collect may want to take notes. If you don't want to take notes, just email me or text me and I'll send you images of my notes because it tells a lot of good collecting information. So one of the things that made me start collecting these is that at the time they were produced from 1869 to 1892. Mexico as a country had a relatively low population compared to the United States, and the production of coins was spread across 10 mints. So therefore, almost all the coins, in fact not, almost all the coins are sub 100,000 mintage issues. There's really only about 20 dams, date, assay, or mint combinations that have over 100,000 mintage. And some of them have as low as 900 coins. So overall, the Republic 25 centavos were produced in minuscule numbers by today's standard. We'll start by talking about the Alamos Mint. It produced coins from 1874 to 1890, and it was continuous production. When I say continuous, every year they had at least a few coins produced. Now, I'm going to talk about whether it's continuous or sporadic because that's an important data point. The 25 centavos, as well as most of the other miners, only issued only publicized the mint figures for about half of the years. So, as a rule, if a mint had sporadic annual production, that's probably a mint that has lower mintages overall than a mint that has continuous production. That's just a general rule of thumb to keep in mind when you're looking at coins, because half of them don't have any stated mintage. One oddity about the Alamos 25 centavos is that they're in very high demand among collectors. 10 mints, and surprisingly the demand for coins by mint is extremely variable. So 25 centavos from Alamos are very popular, and that's because the collector, the general perception of the collectors is that Alamos dams are scarce. And in general they are. There is two rare dates, the 77 and the 81, the 77 being rare, the 81 being very rare. To tell you how rare the 81 is, I collected for 20 years before I ever got an example. So there, some of those, and Scott got a 77 from me one time, and they're not cheap. So, but all the dates that aren't rare are scarce, pretty much. Now the North American coins and prices, we were talking about that earlier, and take those relative prices, not absolute price, relative prices with a grain of salt, because scarce isn't always scarce. some of these dates are much scarcer than the prices would indicate. Keep that in mind when you're buying them. And as in terms of grade, Alamos is notorious for being almost unobtainable in mint state. If you see an Alamos being offered in mint state in an auction, probably it's going to go for a minimum of $500, most likely $1,500 to $2,000. I think I only have one mint state in my collection, and that has hairlines. Because I'm a cheap guy. I don't like. I can't compete for the very high grade, and because there's so few in mint state that when there's one that's been slabbed with no problem, it's going to go for thousands. So my only mint state example has hairlines. That goes to show how hard to get they are. Chihuahua's the next mint we're going to talk about, and that was produced from 1871 to 1889, and it was intermittent production. The 71 is about the only date, surprisingly, the first date is about the only date that's available in mint state. And the reason is there was a small hoard of 10, I assume it was about 10 coins. A hoard of 10 coins in mint state actually is a pretty good size hoard for Mexico. It means the average guy would be able to buy a mint state if he wanted. The 72 is very scarce, and all Chihuahua 25 centavos are in pretty good demand. And coins are generally going to be in good demand if the perception among collectors is that they're uniformly scarce or rare. That's because everybody knows how bad the books are, and people go in general by rules of thumb when they're at a show. And you see an Alamos, buy it. You see a Chihuahua, buy it. And so on and so forth. The next mint is Culiacan. That produced coins from 1871 to 1892. 1892 was the last year of production. And I would find it pretty interesting if somebody could come up with a good explanation of what was going on in Mexico in the 1890s. Because if you look at production, the 25 centavos pretty much ended production in 90. Culiacan went on and did a 92. Then in terms of the 50 centavos, they pretty much ended in 87. And the 10 centavos were produced in vast number, relatively speaking, in vast numbers. So the only explanation, which is a guess on my part, of what was going on in Mexico in the 1890s to account for the fact that 25s and 50s were no longer produced, but yet the 10 and 5 were produced in vast quantity, is probably a general impoverishment of the population. And that's probably a good explanation. You might have better insight into that.
Yeah, there was a lot of banking crises that hit in the late 1880s and early 1890s.
It didn't affect 8 real production.
Well, no, that was an export thing to the east, right? To mainly East Asia. But the overall economies in both Europe, which a lot of exports from Mexico went to Europe, and then also the
Mexico was about the only big country still on the silver standard.
Right, and so when those happened, those big banking crises, I mean, they're essentially plummeting, failing banks, people's money.
So it's like continuous recessions.
Yeah.
So it is general impoverishment of the working people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my grandfather, born 1904, we talked about the Great Depression time. He said the 1890s were really bad across the world.
Emily, you might want to get them.
I just wanted to add that. He says 1890s were worse than the Great Depression
Yeah.
of 1930s.
Yeah, it even hurt
money
in the
supply,
US
They were really
too.
bad.
Yeah, because the 93 and 95 production were very low for silver dollars. So that's probably a good explanation. But keep in mind, 92 was the last year of production. And this explains why 25 centavos in general, excluding Mexico City, are very difficult to get in high grade. And that's because they ceased production about 13 years before they ended circulation. And they really circulated until the 1920s. But the general end was 1906. But by that time, the newest 25 centavo was 14 years old. So that's why these 25 centavos and the 50s are so expensive and difficult to get in high grade. Unless somebody took a small sack of them and buried them in their wall or their floor, and then they found it 100 years later. So the production was 71 to 92, and it was continuous production except for 2 years. They are, as I said, very difficult to find in mint state. And of the, 18 dams that were produced, 8 of them were rare. So the highest proportion of rarities are actually Culiacan. And some of those are extremely rare coins. It's not the rarest dates, but in general, production in Culiacan was very low. Durango, again, very low production. They produced coins from 73 to 1890. It was intermittent production. 1880 is excessively rare. An advanced collector that we all know, I'm not going to give his name, I know bought one about 15 years ago in good for $2,500. So I doubt there's more than 2 or 3. I mean, I haven't seen a figure, but I haven't seen another one since. So 1880 is fabulously rare. 1873 has a mintage of less than 1,000. You just bought an 1873 25 centavo a while back, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was looking at the price you paid, and I'll buy it back anytime you want to sell it.
I'm good.
So, there's a good number of rare dates in Durango. It's almost impossible to find any in high grade, and by high grade I mean XF, AU, BU. That's because they were rare to begin with. The last one produced was in 90, and then they circulated for another 20 years after that. Therefore, my advice is if you ever see one in XF, even if you think the price is a little bit high, get it, because there aren't that many that'll be offered. And if you find one in XF, it's likely to be an 89 or 90. The 73 and 78 are rare. There's 77, 79, 82, 84 are scarce to very scarce. And we already talked about the 80. The next mint is Guadalajara. Guadalajara only produced from 1880 until 1889, and it was intermittent production. They are available but expensive in MS. I think I had an MS 64 one time, and I sold it to a collector up in Pflugerville. And again, when you sell stuff like that, oftentimes you get seller's remorse because the price just keeps going up, and they're almost unattainable. But my point is that they're available in MS, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. The mintages on a lot of them, a good portion of them, are stated, and they're often in the teens at 20, from 15 to 28,000. But surprisingly, because of the short run, it defies logic, but they're not in great demand. You can put out a good run of GAs on a price list, and only a few of them might be snapped up. So the demand for Alamos is probably irrationally high, and the demand for Guadalajara is probably irrationally low. Guanajuato had continuous production from 1870 to 1890. They are available but not common in MS. In general, if you see one without hairlines from Guanajuato in an MS grade, even uncertified, the minimum price you'll pay is $200. If it's certified, even like 61, it'll cost you $250. So they're not cheap. And that's because Guanajuatos, everybody figures they're available in VU and they're common, but they're probably only about a quarter as common as the Mexico cities. And even the Zacatecases are more common in MS than the Guanajuatos are in MS. All dates are common. There's no rarities, no scarcities for Guanajuato. As a result, they're always the last mint or the second or third last mint that people collect because they figure, oh, I can always get them. But they are usually well struck. And that's not always the case for high grade 25 centavos. As I'm going to mention, some of these mints are notorious for producing flat strikes. And it's a question of what was their standards of production. You know, you can tell the mints that just wanted to crank out the coins and the ones that took pride in their work. And in general, Guanajuato mint masters took pride in their work because they're almost always well-struck coins, even in VF. Hermosillo had continuous production from 1870 to 1890. It is almost impossible to get one in MS. I imagine there's a few available to the very rich, but it would take decades of collecting and a lot of money to compete to get those MS examples from Hermosillo. The 75 Hermosillo is rare, and 4 others for the mint are scarce to very scarce. And in general, you can figure Hermosillo 25 centavos are a lot tougher to get than people think. Mexico City, and don't be upset, I still got 3 minutes to go. Mexico City had continuous production from 1869 to 1890.
I think this gentleman's had enough.
Prior to 1875, they are tough to get in mint state. After 1875, or after 1880, they're easy to get in mint state. And the quality of the strikes is very high. If you get them in mint state, often the examples you'll see are proof-like. Very high production. But they did the same thing with 2 reals. Mexico City, at least after 1840, had very high standards of production. Their 2 reals, for example, in the 1830s were all flat strikes that I've seen. But after that, they had very high quality production. And they did that with the 25 centavos. There's not great demand for MOs. Like I said, collectors who are allocating their funds will buy MOs later on, and they'll pass them by because they'll figure they're always available. unless they're looking for a high-grade type. And they're not wrong because all of the dams are common or uncommon. No scarcities, no rarities. Potosi had continuous production from 1869 to 1890. They're almost unavailable in AU or BU. There's, in that, 22-year stretch, there are 3 dams that are rare and 4 that are scarce. So it's a pretty tough mint. And coins of the mint in general are in good demand. Not as in high demand as the Alamos or Chihuahua, perhaps, but they're still in pretty high demand. Zacatecas is the final mint that had produced 25 centavos. That, again, had production from 1870 to 1890. It was continuous. It is scarce in mint state, and oftentimes, if you see one in mint state or AU, there's weak centers. So they were just interested in popping them out. They were in it for the money, not the art. All of the dams are common to uncommon, no rarities in Zacatecas, 25 centavos. And as with Geo and Emo, the Zacatecases are not in great demand except as a high-grade type. I would say in conclusion, as with all other Republic miners, don't get into them, don't get into collecting them if you have an obsession to complete. Because it's impossible to complete a set of Republic 25 centavos. If for no other reason than the 1880 Durango, the 1875 Hermosillo, there's plenty of impediments. And again, if you just want to produce a mint type set, 1 coin from each of the mints in high grade, that is almost as tough as completing the whole set. You can't basically get 1 high grade from each of the mints. Some of those mints are very difficult to even get an XF. But being a guy who never had any compulsion to complete a set, I never even completed my Mark Dime set. So collecting Mexican 25 centavos is the perfect thing for me to do. It's an awfully fun obsession, just because when you just, if you started tomorrow and all you had was the notes from this speech, it would give you a real good head start. Because it would tell you, if you were at a show and you saw an XF or AU example from a certain mint, it would tell you whether you should stretch to buy that or not. So those armed with the information actually are equipped to have more fun collecting these 25 centavos and Republic miners in general. Anyway, thank you all for your time, and if any of you ever have any questions about the series, give me an email, send me an email. My email ID is os2guy1@gmail.com. And as long as your question is respectful, you'll probably get an answer. Thank you.
Thank you.